How is manufacturing or FMCG different from pharma?
You won't actually go ahead and buy a ketchup which is 3 months from expiry, but you wouldn't mind actually buying a medicine 3 months from expiry. Even I heard of this term called supply chain in 96, 97. We are about $6 billion plus. 2 billion of that, one third of that comes from India, one third of that comes from the US, and the remaining one third comes from the rest of the world. All put together, we are in excess of 100 countries. The physical distribution works like a dream. And I'll give you an example. You go to a chemist, ask the chemist to give you a particular medicine, the chemist won't have it. But chemist will tell you, sir, आप घर चले जाओ,
मंगवा के देता हूँ
आपके पहुंचने से पहले पहुंच जाएगा मेडिसिन.
Distributors or the chemists are your customers.
The main customer is a doctor, because doctor is who writes the prescription. And the secondary customer is basically the distributor. For blue collar jobs also, two things which are very important. One of those days when people used to say roti kapda makan. Okay? Even for blue collar workers today, we have to make their job easier on the job. There were no flights which were operational, and then we had to kind of get the medicines across to the patients in America. And of course, there were no ports which were operational. And we decided to kind of charter a plane. Yeah, without data, intuition is sheer luck. China has a trump card. There is Donald Trump for America, China has the trump card.
What exactly is API and why are we dependent on China?
If you ask me very honestly,
Welcome to the Corner Office, powered by Procura. Today's guest runs a supply chain across 100 plus countries, 40 plus manufacturing plants, and ensures life-saving medicines are delivered on time, every time. Mr. Sreenivas Rao, the global supply chain head at Sun Pharmaceuticals, the fourth largest general pharmaceuticals company in the world. We talk about how he has flown chartered planes to beat COVID lockdowns, about API shortages, about quick commerce in medicine, and why, according to him, the best run factories in future will only need a man and a dog. Let's find out. Hi Sreenivas, how are you?
very well, thank you. Good morning to you.
Welcome to the Corner Office and thank you so much for coming here and for doing this. It really means a lot. I'm really excited for this one.
Pleasure is mine, Ruchi.
So let's start very simply. You've worked at Unilever, you worked at Reckitt, and now you're at Sun Pharma. You've led supply chains in all these companies. So how is manufacturing or FMCG different from pharma in terms of supply chain?
So, pharmaceuticals are different to FMCG. FMCG, by the very name, it is fast moving and therefore has to be agile. Yeah? And as a consumer or a patient, when we actually go to the shop to buy, let's say, an FMCG goods, you look at the date of manufacturing, whereas in the case of a pharmaceutical product, you look at the date of expiry. You won't actually go ahead and buy a ketchup which is 3 months from expiry, but you wouldn't mind actually buying a medicine 3 months from expiry. So that sets the tone for actually the supply chain being agile, which is FMCG, the other being service oriented. What do you mean by service oriented in a pharmaceutical supply chain? If you have a stomach ache, you want a medicine for stomach ache only. You can't take a medicine for some other ache. Yeah, I'm just giving a very layman's example. But if you have a Lux Pink is what you wanted, but there is no pink, but there is a violet, you won't mind actually buying a Lux Violet. So there is slight difference in both the things. One is, of course, very clear in terms of what SKU, what item you want, and therefore the service level expectation. The other one is basically agility. So that's what I would say at a very broad level.
And you spoke about margins.
Yeah.
So that is one stark difference that can be seen between FMCG and pharma, is that pharma can better afford to spend in logistics because of their higher margins than FMCG. So has that in a way been better for you at Sun Pharma than your previous experiences?
No, these are two different businesses. So consumer goods, as I keep saying, that the value density of the goods, which means the value in a case. And this is something which I have coined this term called value density of the goods. Okay, if the case value is cost of goods is, let's say, $5, you cannot afford to transport it beyond 200 kilometers. I'll give you a case in point. Bottled water, soda, cold drinks. They will typically be, let's say, $10 for a sale of a case of 10 kgs, yeah, on a good day. right? A liter of bottle will cost you how much? 50 rupees? Yeah, I mean, 12 liters is like, 600 rupees, even less than $10.
Right.
So that's why the supply chains get designed in a manner that you have a bottling plant for 200-kilometer radius. The concentrate is shipped to the bottling plant. They add the water and the bottle, and then they ship it in a 200-kilometer radius. Because shipping cost as a percentage of cost of goods as a percentage of sales is very high for them.
Right.
Now, from a 600 rupee case, you go to a 3,000 rupee case, you can obviously ship it to 1,000 kilometers.
Right.
For a pharmaceutical goods, we are, let's say, 30,000 rupees a case. I'm just giving a case in point. Yeah? We can afford to perhaps air freight. Because as a percentage of our sale value, it's very marginal.
Right. That's very well explained, actually. So, help us understand in terms of numbers, the scale that you're handling and at Sun Pharma, number of countries, number of factories, number of vendors. If you can explain the scale of what you do.
So we are a global company, and it's all in the public domain. We are about $6 billion plus. 2 billion of that, 1/3 of that comes from India, 1/3 of that comes from US, and the remaining 1/3 comes from the rest of the world. All put together, we are in excess of 100 countries operations. When I say operations, the sales and marketing and everything. In terms of manufacturing operations, we have perhaps in all continents excepting Antarctica. Yeah, and not many people know. We've got about 40 plus sites in operation, and multitude of vendors who supply materials to us. And there are more than 200 contract manufacturers also who supply us globally. So that's the scale. In terms of cost of goods, more than $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion, and total spends of close to about $2 billion in direct plus indirect put together.
Right. So let me take you back a little bit. So ever since you started, so if I'm not wrong, the term supply chain was coined in 1982.
That's right.
Since I think you would be in your school or college at that time. Since then, from a purchase department, the role has evolved into supply chain now.
Yes.
How have you seen it really happen, and where does it stand now?
Well, I think you asked a very relevant question. Yeah, when I was in college, I didn't hear of the name called supply chain, to be super honest with you. Yeah?
Right.
I think the first time I heard of the name supply chain was almost like 5-6 years after I joined the workforce. I joined the workforce in 92, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I heard of this term called supply chain in 96, 97. My career was, early days of my careers were all in factories, manufacturing operations, maintenance, and then so on and so forth. Yeah. And so how has it evolved? It used to be either logistics or manufacturing or purchase. Yeah. Logistics would be reporting into somebody, purchase into somebody, mostly into finance at some point in time. I have seen that thing. Yeah. Then there was nothing called as a supply chain planning per se. There was some portion called demand planning, which was with sales, some portion with factories for supply planning. And SNOP as a meeting was not a very big concept back in those days when I started. And I've seen that thing evolving over a period of time. And today I can tell you a lot of core sector industries actually have 3 verticals in the supply chain itself. Supply chain would be plan, make, source, and deliver, the 4 legs of supply chain. So in a lot of companies where manufacturing, there's a lot of intensity, whether it's capital intensity, regulatory intensity. Manufacturing is called operations. They have hived it off, not kept within supply chain. Procurement, where the cost of goods is very large, impact is very high, they've kept it separately again. Yeah. And supply chain is basically planning and delivery, logistics and customer service, and the whole 9 yards. So from nothing to actually forming a supply chain integrated, now I see a little bit of disintegrated supply chain, although within the supply chain domain. So it's been a fantastic evolution in the last 35 odd years, I would say. Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure it would have been really an enriching experience, right? I just want to understand from you. So how do I put it? Post-COVID, the instability in the global markets have really increased.
Yes.
Things are not how they used to be. So everyone talks about just in time, whereas you have very actively spoken about just in case,
Yes,
which
indeed.
is how do you plan for the unthinkables?
Yeah.
So can you run us through how that has evolved post COVID?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, Ruchir. As I keep saying that, supply chains, people are taught to do just in time. This is a concept which the Japanese started back in those days, in the late 80s, early 90s. And this is about optimization of inventory, making sure that your return on capital employed is the maxed out and so on and so forth. Yeah. And as you rightly put across, COVID has actually meant a lot of uncertainties to the environment. Started to. But then, post COVID, there has been a Suez Canal, then there has been a war issue, and then now, of course, the trade, war which is actually happening from China to US and everything. And I'm sure you've heard of the rare metal stoppages which actually China has done. Is going to create a lot of issues. Some of the companies in Chicago has actually stopped manufacturing for automobiles. Even in India, by the way, I don't know if you have actually picked up that news or not. They don't have too much of products coming in because the reliance on various parts of the world has increased so much. Yeah, so the interdependence on various countries is so high today for actually getting the final end product that it's become very, very complex. And that is why I keep saying that, just in case is also an important element for people to think through, not necessarily plan for it, but make sure that you have a backup plan ready just in case if something happens.
Right.
Yeah. I was actually reading the newspaper yesterday only. In fact, I recollect that the automobile companies are now having a tough time to kind of get the materials with respect to the rare metals and the magnets which are used in a lot of auto components, in the motors. Electric vehicles, 70-80% of the batteries are manufactured in China. And if China has decided to actually stop export of rare metals, so 70 to 80% of the rare metals are mined in China. More than 90% are actually processed in China. So China has a trump card. While there is Donald Trump for America, China has the trump card, I would say. Yeah.
Right. So, talking about China and talking about dependency, I can't imagine what kind of a tough time you and the company would have had during COVID when a lot of API dependency is on China. Can you explain our viewers and us that what exactly is API and why are we dependent on China? Also, post that, after COVID, have you been able to reduce that dependency on China and create more local options, or are we still dependent on China?
So let me put it this way. Dependency on China used to be a lot more till 10 years ago. Most of the companies actually started working upon reducing their dependency on China from 2015, 5 years ahead of COVID, in my opinion. Yeah. So coming back to the question of yours, what is API? API is nothing but active pharmaceutical ingredient. It's actually chemically synthesized in most of the cases. In some cases, it's biological fermentation and then processed later on. So to cut a long story short, the fine chemicals industry in China is a lot bigger, and API industry is very heavily dependent on either the KSMs, which is the key starting materials, or the intermediates, or the finished product, which is the API, which is used for creating the formulations in the tablets. During the COVID period, of course, yes, a lot of companies did struggle, and they piled up a lot of material, which actually kept on running for almost more than a year for most of the companies. It was tough time indeed, because the flights were not operational, the supply chains were broken, and so on and so forth.
Right. If I'm not wrong, you all had a chartered flight carrying medicine during COVID.
Yeah. I mean, that's something which was an outlier. Yes, I agree with you. Yeah.
Right. That must mean some real dedication to customer centricity.
Absolutely, yes.
So I believe that is something that you all actively talk about, customer centricity at Sun Pharma.
Correct. So this was the time when I still remember, there were no flights which were operational, and then we had to kind of get the medicines across to the patients in America. and of course there were no ports which were operational. Then we decided to kind of charter a plane, and this was not a cargo plane, this was actually a passenger plane. We actually flew that empty in and actually filled it in the cargo, about 66 pallets I do remember.
Wow.
And sent it back. Yeah.
Also, coming to technology, so you worked at the best places with, the best leaderships across industries.
Yeah.
I really want to understand from you, in today's date, when I order a 200 rupees food delivery, I can track that parcel from the restaurant till my doorstep with minutes counting down. Whereas in procurement or in supply chain, there are crores worth of logistics and trucks, going about. And if in case there is a mishap, you don't get to know. There is no on time, or there is no transparency or visibility.
Real time. Yeah.
Why is that? Have we still not achieved that?
So there are two types of let's say logistics. Let me put it this way: one is a B2B logistics, and another is a B2C logistics. Right now, real-time tracking of B2B logistics has never been a focal point for the companies, and that's also one of the reasons why they haven't done it. There are outliers. For example, in pharmaceutical companies, we actually do track some real-time B2B logistics, yeah, and we have a control tower. For example, we know if we have shipped a container on the ocean, we know how many days it's going to reach. We know which part of the ocean it is right now, and so on and so forth. But I agree with you, when it comes to the domestic logistics, we guys are not so great at this point in time in India. And I would not expect the user companies to solve this problem. Let me make it clear that I would expect, let's say, some technology companies to come and give a GPS solutioning problem to the issue, rather than actually individual companies like a Sun Pharma or a Unilever or a Reckitt solving this problem. And this could be a big business by itself, because the way I look at it is that any outlier, and I was talking to somebody on the agentic AI today, yeah. Now, there's one thing called robotic process automation, which actually does a lot of repetitive tasks, but agentic AI will actually find outliers and then actually do the escalation. And if there is a truck which is actually supposed to travel from Bombay to Delhi and it has taken a detour, then that should actually get highlighted on your control tower.
Correct.
So these are the agentic AI stuff which is actually happening. I agree with you that the B2B logistics space in terms of track and trace is, let's say, about 5 to 7 or 10 years behind the B2C.
Right.
Yeah.
And you say we are some years behind, but isn't anyway pharma always a little behind? Fair because they are safety first, but always in adoption of tech, pharma is a little lagging behind.
Indeed.
One best example is barcode implementation is still not done at a chemist level, right?
Yeah.
The chemists have to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So why is that, or is that really changing, or will that always continue, that any new tech will take time to get into the pharma sector?
No, I have a philosophical disagreement here that we don't need to be late in every part. Okay, just because we are into manufacturing of medicines and trying to save the lives of the people, I agree that we cannot take risk when it comes to the core, which is the R&D and manufacturing of it. But things like on the side, barcode implementation has got no reason for you to delay.
Correct.
Yeah. The industry is now taking it on, and taking it on one step ahead, in the sense that industry is now putting in 2D barcodes, not a 1D barcode, which is what the consumer industry did about 15 years ago. Yeah. So the 2D barcode carries a lot more information in terms of the batch number, the serial number, and the whole 9 yards. And the regulator in India actually has mandated for about 300 to 400 brands to have a 2D barcode with a unique serial number on each and every saleable pack, which is happening as we speak. And my gut feel is that it will accelerate, because it will also enable a lot of manufacturing companies like us to go and trace the spurious goods which are coming into the market, which are a health hazard for the patients and a revenue leakage for the company.
Right.
Yeah.
That should really help. So, talking about chemists, India's pharma trade is really wild. Just, least I can say is that around 8 lakh chemists, around 1 lakh distributors, if I'm not wrong. What is the one thing that is, fundamentally broken in the distribution?
If you ask me very honestly, the physical distribution works like a dream. And I'll give you an example. You go to a chemist, ask the chemist to give you a particular medicine, the chemist won't have it. But chemist will tell you, सर आप घर चले जाओ,
मंगवा के देता हूँ.
मंगवा के देता हूँ, आपके पहुँचने से पहले पहुँच जाएगा मेडिसिन.
Right.
FMCG won't have that. That's why I'm saying it works like a dream. What is broken, to come to your specific question, the information exchange is completely broken. Between the distributor to the chemist and chemist to the patient, the information availability is so much, but it's completely broken.
Right, right.
If we have that information, we can solve problems of spurious goods, we can solve problems of availability at the chemist, and many others. And this requires a concentrated effort from the associations who manage these chemists and traders.
Right. And in this chain of stakeholders, the distributors or the chemists are your customers, right? Essentially,
Correct.
the patient
Distributors.
The patients are actually the consumers.
Absolutely.
Right. So how does that change your, alignment of stakeholders, if I may say? How do you make sure that those, let's say 1 lakh distributors, how many ever the Sun Pharma would be catering to, how are they kept happy?
So that's a very good question. So the difference again between a consumer industry and let's say a pharma industry is that pharma industry, the main customer is a doctor, because doctor is who writes the prescription, and the secondary customer is basically the distributor, and at times the chemist. The patient doesn't come into the picture at all.
Correct.
For a pharmaceutical company. As opposed to that, in the consumer goods industry, the consumer is a god. Okay? Now, you would see a lot of companies actually starting to generate awareness about the drugs and the companies in the eyes of the patients. Okay? Case in point, for example, Cipla used to run an advertisement, and Priyanka Chopra was their brand ambassador, where she said that inhalation is actually good for you, right? There was this particular myth that inhalation actually is not good, and so there are these kinds of things which are happening, and you would have seen Sun Pharma also advertising a lot of late.
Yeah. So going back to the distribution channel, you've also mentioned that Sun Pharma has successfully spread out its billing across 4 weeks uniformly, whereas most of the pharma targets usually close at the end of the month. So can you explain us how you managed to do that, spread it across all the 4 weeks?
So there's a lot of technology which has gone behind it. And I'm proud to say that this is one of the, let's say, marquee projects which we did in the last 1.5 years. To be able to kind of predict the demand and actually do a demand forecasting for each and every distributor and projecting what the demand would be is something which we have done. I would say we are very proud, but this is something which we actually tried to do on a very similar lines what Asian Paints has done long ago. They also do the similar stuff of actually predicting demand at a distributor level or a dealer level, and they actually take those goods and service on a 2 times a day basis in some other pockets.
Right. You've said before that your goal is no-touch supply chain, and you also famously went on to say that in future my goal is, or my dream is, to have a factory with one man and a dog. Can you explain us what do you exactly mean by that, and how far are we actually from that?
This is like a fully automated factory, which is the dream, whereby you don't need any people to run the factory, etc. For sure, in India, we are far away. Yeah, no doubt about it. But I have seen places and some of the lines where there's so much of robotic automation that there are two. For example, I used to run aerosol lines in the United States. there were three operators who were running two lines at 500 cans a minute. Yeah. So one operator operating the line, both the lines, one operator feeding the cans, and one operator actually taking the filled cans out. So so that's what it is. Now, obviously, yes, you require a lot of you know reliability in equipment which you actually have, because more often than not, the operators are there to make sure when there is an interruption. So you need equipment which can run uninterruptedly, and that's where the whole thing is. Can this be done? For sure. In fact, in today's context of technology, so much where um, automated driven cars are being run on the roads, not in
Yes.
India, but in the States and various other places. I don't see this dream of mine coming true in the next five years, in my opinion. I don't see it's being a very distant one.
Okay. And another one thing which is a very debated topic always is I wanted to get your opinion on e-auctions. So it has started to become a norm in procurement, but let's be honest, are are they genuinely unlocking any value, or is it that who drives the price to the bottom first?
So, my point of view is in procurement, there are two things. One is a longer term procurement, the other is a one off procurement. E-auctions work well in some cases and they don't work in some other cases. When you talk about long-term procurements, for example, when you have a long-term relationships for, let's say, API suppliers, you don't have multiple API suppliers for the same API. You cannot do an e-auction with one supplier for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Now, so their relationship management with respect to actually going and finding the value stream analysis at the supplier's end will actually deliver more value than doing this e-auction gimmicks, in my opinion.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, e-auctions do work when you have one-off supplies happening. E-auctions do work when you know that there is excess capacity in the market for suppliers, and suppliers have a cost of actually keeping the capacity idle, and they want to share that the cost of keeping it idle with the companies. So what I mean is, for example, if there is a product which is to be sold for 100 rupees, the cost of goods for them is, let's say, 70, and the profit margin is 10, and 20 rupees is the manufacturing cost. Out of the 20, let's say if 10 is fixed manufacturing cost anyways, whether they're running it or not running it, they will continue to bear that 10. So they might actually give away a portion of the 10.
Right.
Yeah, not the profit part, I'm saying. Give a portion of the fixed cost. Those are the cases when e-auctions work. Yeah. So to simplify my answer, e-auctions work in some cases, especially when there is excess capacity available, and when you want to unlock the unknown. Yeah, that's when it works. But when you know everything, then e-auction doesn't add too much value.
Right.
That's my view.
Right. Let's talk numbers in terms of your top 2 or 3 KPIs that you usually have live on your dashboard. Can you name them? What are the main metrics that you look at?
So, for supply chain guys, customer service is the most important thing. Very clear. Yeah, I mean, it's not a sales KPI anymore. Okay, so if there are two parts of my KPIs, one is customer service, other is the cost of goods. Very simple. And if there is a third one, that's called, I would say, working capital. Only three.
Right.
Customer service, which actually brings value generation for the company from a sales perspective, cost of goods is margin, and working capital is inventory management.
Right.
That gives you return on capital employed.
Right. That's very insightful. Also, you've seen both the sides, global pharma giant, and like I said, FMCG. So, which one do you think trains better or breeds better talent in terms of supply chain?
See, both are very different. Yeah. And so there is no one size fits all. Okay. I would say that, consumer goods industry, by the very nature of what they are, they are a lot more process oriented than from a supply chain perspective. I'm talking about, not from a manufacturing perspective. Whereas you know, in the pharma industry, there is a little less processes, right? And there is always a dichotomy that, where do you get trained better, where there are processes or where there are no processes. I mean, for people who are very regimented in the way they are thinking, the earlier is better. For people who can thrive in actually environments which are unstructured, the later is better.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Also, so another stakeholder is the logistics frontline, right? The logistics talent, or if in loose terms, I can say the blue collar jobs. Right? What have you personally found that works with them or that retains them?
So, fortunately for us in India, we have enough of workforce available. Demographics allows us the availability of people is very good. But having said that, for blue collar jobs also, two things which are very important. Gone are those days when people used to say roti kapda or makan. Okay? Even for blue collar workers today, we have to make their job easier on the job. When I started working, we would actually make people carry a 50 kg bag on their backs, which is like 35 years ago. Not anymore. If there is a 50 kg bag which has to be lifted, there will be a vacuum suction cup, a robotic arm, which the operator will operate it and actually put it in. I mean, the case in point is, I can give an analogy of when I was a small child, clothes were hand washed. Machines were not there. Yeah, when I was growing up, the maids would come in and check if there is a washing machine. Then only the maid was willing to kind of work for you. So similarly, even in the factories for blue collar workers, aiding them to actually make their life easier is a very important retainer for them.
Right, right, right. Okay. So just to move away from the serious conversations, if you could give us an example, or a day where you faced some serious crisis and ended up you really saving the day, but any horror story that you remember from your 35-year long career?
I do remember, for example, when I was building a new factory, when I was working for an Uttaranchal, yeah, and for some reason, a portion of the slab under construction fell. And that was a huge thing. Fortunately, it was late in the evening and not many people were underneath there. The first news when it came to me, it literally was a horror story for me. Yeah. But yes, then we worked with the contractors, with the designers, with the factory inspectorate and the whole 9 yards, and actually corrected the situation. But yes, I agree. That was one of the horror stories which we had. Yeah.
Right, right. And talking about factories, if I'm not wrong, at the age of 35, you were handling 10 factories. And within those 10 factories, you at some point realized that I want to move away from line assembly and take the center stage. So, what was that transition like, and what leadership lessons did you learn at that time?
I used to work for Unilever then, and Unilever is known for actually giving responsibilities at a very early stage of your life and career. And I was perhaps a little more fortunate than others to actually get a little earlier. And as you said, that at the age of 35, I became a cluster head for Northern region and was managing multiple factories and multiple contract manufacturers. And suddenly I realized that, it's extremely important for, the future growth of myself, for me to kind of step aside a line responsibility role and go into roles which will not have an army of people reporting into you, but yet you will need to use your influencing power to be able to actually drive decisions which have a larger impact. So that was a very specific awakening moment, in my opinion, which has actually leapfrogged me into the next step of my career. Then I took a role in the center, in the head office, and I didn't have too many people reporting to me. I think 2 or 3 people. from so many factory managers and such a big entourage and so on and so forth. Initially, I felt a little uncomfortable, but my job was to influence the vice presidents and the country heads of supply chains towards actually creating a supply chain which is much more efficient and much more robust and much more sustainable. And so that gave me a lot of learnings, that it's influencing skills which one has to kind of, improve as you keep growing in stature.
Right. That's very inspiring and sounds very exciting. Okay, so moving on to the next segment, we really like to do rapid fire questions. So, biggest export market for Sun Pharma in 2025?
US,
Uh, the most challenging country to export to?
Zimbabwe,
Okay. One tech tool you can't live without in the supply chain?
Excel.
Excel. Nice. One vendor pitch you still remember, for good or for bad?
One vendor pitch.
Yes.
So back in 1995, yeah. So there was a vendor for machines who was coming in, yeah, and actually 1998, and he was pitching for actually buying his machines, which was I was actually buying them for manufacturing of Surf Excel, filling of Surf Excel, and it was from a volumetric to a gravimetric filling, which was weighing filling. So, and not only did he pitch me, I pitched on his behalf to my senior guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. If supply chain were a sport, what sport would it be?
Coco,
Coco.
because it's a relay race.
Yeah. I get it. What's the first thing you do when you land after an international work trip?
I tend to kind of relax a little bit and try to fight the jet lag, because my international work trips are mostly a little more jet laggy because they're not within Asia. Yeah.
Right. An early mistake that taught you more than any MBA could?
When I was working in a factory again, yeah, I always thought that I knew it all. Okay, and I know, there were many other people who knew a lot more than me in their specific area of field, which is what I learned it very early in my life, that accept things from others.
What book are you most inspired by?
So recently I'm reading a book called The Money Trap. It's by a gentleman called Alok Sama. He was the CFO for SoftBank. It's a very funnily and wittily written book. I would advise you also to read it, because you're in the startup
Sure.
circles. Yeah.
What is one compliment your team gives you that you secretly love?
So I give them a lot of elbow room, and which means I manage more by exception, which is what they love.
Right.
Yeah, and I also like it.
One red flag and a green flag in a vendor?
Too much of hype is a red flag for me. Too much of boasting oneself. Yeah. Green flag means make sure that the opposite of that. If people are actually coming up with exact numbers and exact pitches of what they are doing, that's where I would love.
Right. Yeah, I'm really curious about this. What's your country count?
I have never done that, but would be close to 40.
40?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And this question is because I know you admire both of them. Elon Musk or Tony Seba?
Tony Seba.
Tony Seba. Okay. What's more powerful, intuition or data?
I mean, it's a catch-22, intuition backed by data. Intuition for the last 20% of the lab, first 80% data.
Right.
Tricky one.
Yeah.
Yeah, without data, intuition is sheer luck.
Right.
But the last 20-30% you have to go with the gut feel and the intuition. Yeah. You can't wait for the 100% of the data. Then that doesn't make you a good manager.
Okay. I think that's about it. You were very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruchi. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you on the podcast.
And thank you so much for doing this. This has been very insightful. This gives me an insight into pharma, into logistics, into supply chain, into FMCG, and I've learnt a lot from you. And to end this, I would really like to know, what advice would you like to give a youngster who are just starting out their careers?
So, my piece of advice to people who start their careers, including to my own children, I keep telling them that growth is not only vertical. Growth has two components, is multidimensional, horizontal and vertical. What I mean by horizontal, let me elaborate, is gather as many experiences in your own function but in different sub-function. That will keep you in good stead as you keep growing vertically, because once having an experience of a lateral function makes you a much more richer person and much more capable person for taking the role above. So growth is multidimensional, not unidimensional. If there is a choice between going up and also going horizontal, then I would say make the wise choice of looking at it as which one is better for the person.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed that episode, please like, comment, subscribe, and do share it with a colleague who's deep in procurement, operations, logistics, or just enjoys a good supply chain story. Thank you.